Were you able to do your research and find out what Tom and My Thumb was, what the story was? It reminded me a little bit of another fairy tale that's very well known by most people. Did it remind you of a fairy tale? It reminded me of Hansel and Gretel. So if you didn't get a chance to look for Tom and My Thumb, go and see if you can do some research. Google it and see if you can find this story for yourself. Well, here is chapter 13 of The Princess and the Goblin. It's called The Goblin's Creatures. About this time, the gentleman who the king left behind to watch over the princess had each occasion to wonder at the testimony of his own eyes, for more than strange were the objects to which they would bear witness. They were of one sort creatures, but so grotesque and misshapen to be more like a child's drawings than anything natural. They saw these creatures only at night, while on guard about the house. The testimony of the man who first reported having seen one of them was that, as he was walking slowly round the house, while yet in the shadow, he caught sight of a creature standing on its hind legs in the moonlight, with its forefeet upon a window ledge, staring in at the window. Its body might have been similar to that of a dog or a wolf, he thought, but he declared on his honor that its head was twice the size it should have been for the size of its body, and it was round as a ball, while the face, which it turned upon him as it fled, was more like one carved by a boy upon the turnip, inside which he's going to put a candle, than anything else he could think of. It rushed into the garden. He sent an arrow after it, and thought he must have struck it, for it gave an unearthly howl, and he could not find his arrow any more than the beast, although he searched all about the place where it vanished. The others laughed at him until he was driven to hold his tongue, and said he must have taken too long a pull at the ale jug. But before 2 nights were over, he had another to side with him. For this one, too, had seen something strange, only quite different from that reported by the first. The description the second man gave of the creature he had seen was yet more grotesque and unlikely. They were both laughed at by the rest, but night after night another came forward to their side, until at last there was only one left to laugh at all his companions. 2 nights more passed, and he saw nothing, but on the third he came rushing in from the garden to the other 2 and met them in front of the house. He was in such an agitation that they declared, for it was their turn now, that the band of his helmet must be cracking under his chin with the rising of his hair inside it. Running with him into that part of the garden, which I have already described, they saw a score of creatures, to not one of which could they give a name, and not one of which was like another, hideous and ludicrous at once, gamboling on the lawn in the moonlight. The supernatural, or rather subnatural, ugliness of their faces, the length of their legs and necks in some, the apparent absence of both or either in others, made the spectators, although in one consent as to what they saw, doubt what they were seeing. And they doubted their ears as well, for the noises they made, although not loud, were as uncouth and varied as their forms, and could be described neither as grunts, nor squeaks, nor roars, nor howls, nor barks, nor yells, nor screams, nor croaks, nor hisses, nor mews, nor shrieks, but only as something like all of them mingled in one horrible dissonance. Keeping in the shadow, the watchers had a few moments to recover themselves before the hideous assembly suspected their presence. But all at once, as if by common consent, the creature scampered off into the direction of a great rock and vanished before the men had come to themselves sufficiently to think of following them. My readers will suspect what these were, but I will now give them full information concerning them. They were, of course, household animals belonging to the goblins, whose ancestors had taken their ancestors many centuries before from the upper regions of light into the lower regions of darkness. The original stocks of these horrible creatures were very much the same as animals now seen about farms and homes in the country, with the exception of a few of them, which had been wild creatures, such as foxes, and indeed wolves and small bears, which the goblins, from their proclivity towards the animal creation, had caught when they were cubs and tamed. But in the course of time, all had undergone even greater changes than had passed upon their owners. They had altered, that is, their descendants had altered, into such creatures as I have not attempted to describe except in the vaguest manner. The various parts of their body assuming, in an apparently arbitrary and self-willed manner, the most abnormal developments. Indeed, so little did any distinct type predominate in some of the bewildering results that you could only have guessed at any known animal that was the original, and even then, what likeness remained would be more one of general expression than of definable confirmation. But what increased the gruesomeness tenfold was that from constant domestic, or indeed rather family association with the goblins, the creatures' countenances had grown into grotesque resemblances of humans. No one understands animals who does not see that, every one of them, even among the fishes, it may be with a dimness and vagueness and infinitely remote, yet it shadows the human. In the case of these, the human resemblance had greatly increased, while their owners had sunk towards them. They had risen toward their owners. But the conditions of subterranean life being equally unnatural for both, while the goblins were worse, the creatures had not improved by the approximation, and its result would have appeared far more ludicrous than consoling to the warmest animal lover. I shall now explain how it was that just then these animals began to show themselves about the king's country house. The goblins, as Curdy had discovered, were mining on, at work both day and night, in divisions, using the scheme after which he lay in wait. In the course of their tunneling, they had broken into the channel of a small stream, but the break being in the top of it, no water had escaped to interfere with their work. Some of the creatures, hovering as they often did about their masters, had found the hole, and had, with the curiosity which had grown to a passion from the restraints of their unnatural circumstances, proceeded to explore the channel. The stream was the same which ran out by the seat on which Irene and her king papa had sat, as I told in an earlier chapter. And the goblin creatures found it jolly fun to get out for a romp on a smooth lawn, such as they had never seen in all their poor, miserable lives. But although they had partaken enough of the nature of their owners to delight in annoying and alarming any of the people they met on the mountain, they were, of course, incapable of plans of their own, or of intentionally furthering those plans of their masters. For several nights after the men-at-arms were at length of one mind as to the fact of the visits of some horrible creatures, whether bodily or spectral, they could not yet say. They watched with special attention that part of the garden where they had last seen them. Perhaps, indeed, they gave in consequence too little attention to the house. But the creatures were too cunning to easily be caught, nor were the watchers quick-eyed enough to descry the head or the keen eyes in it, which, from the opening where the stream came through, would watch them in turn, ready, the moment they should leave the lawn to report the place clear. So these creatures were really, really strange looking. Do you understand what it was that they were? They were the goblin's pets, kind of like our cats and dogs and other animals. And they had grown really, really strange looking for living so long under the earth. And it mentioned in this chapter a part about a boy carving a face into a turnip. And that is another tradition that we have in the United States. It's one that is done around Halloween. It's not a turnip that we carve a face into, but we carve a face into a pumpkin. That's right, to make our jack-o'-lanterns, and we put the candles inside. Well, in England, where this story was written, the author was from there. There was the practice of carving turnips instead of pumpkins, because pumpkins were only in the New World at first, only in the Americas, and they didn't have them in England. So that's a really interesting thing to think about. But what I'd like to challenge you to do is to really use your imagination and draw what you think these crazy pets of the goblins would have looked like. Remember, it said that they all looked different from each other. There wasn't really one sort. Kind of like we have cats and dogs and different types. The goblins' creatures were all sorts of different things with crazy long legs or crazy short legs, big ears, small ears, all sorts of things. So just let your imagination run wild and see what kind of creature you can think up to be the pet of a goblin. Well, I hope you have a great time making your creation, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.